Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It is great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. We're going to talk about the deficit and raising the debt limit. It's on the boards for August, I think. They have to do it or government will be locked down, which is all a farce. Because if they don't do it until November, officially raise it, they will have a way to jigger around the numbers and they will always be within the law. So this is just a game they play, and it's constant, it always happens. And then there's also a political fight. The Democrats have to prove they're loyal to their base, and the Republicans have to prove that they're loyal to their military base, and on it goes. But it's already started, and the whole thing just doesn't even want to mention the fact, well, what's the problem? Why don't they just raise the debt or cut the spending? It's because there's no way they can do that. They can't cut the spending because there's too much hysteria. The country, the people who are dependent on appropriations, which they've gotten everybody somewhat dependent on that, so there's not going to be any cutting, and therefore everybody is locked in place, continue to spend, continue to run up the debt, continue to depend on the Federal Reserve. They'll print the money, and everything is going to be okay. But I think that eventually, though, this has to end. It'll have to, and you just can't continue to do this and live off debt. And that's what we've been doing for a long time. But it's the role of government that we should be talking about. Can we have, a presence around the world the way we do with an empire? They have decided that, the budget originally, Biden was asking for $2 trillion, and that was too much, so he's agreed to just a puny $569 billion, but it's infrastructure. Well, first, I'm sure that's misleading. There's more than just taking care of the potholes around the country and taking care of our highways and bridges. But that's what it indicates, and that's why he got bipartisan support for this. And it worked. He had a lot of high praises for working with the Republicans, and Republicans voted for this. And yet, between the lines, I say, but we'll be back, because we will get that $2 trillion. I would say unless the whole thing comes down on their head before then. But under today's circumstances, the markets just love it. The stock market loves the money. They're protecting themselves against the devaluation of the dollar by owning stocks that have a greater value to it. They think that's a haven for inflation. And to a small degree, that's true. But ultimately, though, the bidding up of stocks way out of proportion and having these PE ratios going up to the sky, that is not a solution to the difficulties when you just print a lot of money. But I think what we're witnessing, Chris, is something they talk about bringing on, that the cultural Marxists that we now have a great deal of influence in Washington, is this modern monetary theory. They say that's what we're going to get, I would say that no, that's been around for a while. It's just incrementalism. There's sound money, which we once had a bit of that around, and our country did pretty well with even the weakness in the gold standard. But that is a lot different. But now they have this theory. They want more. And it looks like it's been increased even in these last couple years with the emphasis on the Marxist movement, tremendous increases in the marketplace. And I do believe, and I think a case can be made, that big corporations go and get in bed with the government. They become crony capitalists, and then they become sympathetic to some of these socialist Marxist viewpoints, and it keeps going on and on. And guess what, Chris? Of course, you know this already, is that it is a system that guarantees social turmoil, because the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and inflation eats their lunch, and the government has to expand their lies. And as time goes on, there'll be more people not believing the lies, and that's going to cause social turmoil. I think that's where we are today.
Right, Dr. Paul, and it's it's because we have an artificial economy. It's not real, and by not real, I mean it's not lasting. And the best analogy that I could come up with, and I learned it from someone else somewhere along the line, is, a person at a bar who's drinking, and he gets an artificial feeling. It's not real. It's not lasting. So our buddy, he drinks too much, and he realizes if he stops now, he's going to have a hangover, and he doesn't like hangovers. But the longer he goes, the worse the hangover will be. So he decides to kick the can down the road and just go for it. And fortunately for him in this plan, the bar has a constant supply of stimulus for him. He will not run out of stimulus. And he happens to have some not very intelligent friends in his ear while he's drinking, telling him, you owe this to yourself. You never have to stop. You never have to pay the price for this. Now, of course, it's not true. If he doesn't stop, he could pass out, get alcohol poisoning, or possibly even die. But this analogy really captures the position that the government is in with debt. They constantly want to kick the can down the road. They want to avoid hangover, which is a recession, depression. And just like the bar, the Fed has unlimited dollars that they can create for this debt. But the longer that this goes, you can't go on forever. You don't owe this to yourself, all this debt. It'll eventually end up in a huge default, huge destruction of the dollar and the economy.
For years, this has been going on to talk about raising the debt limit. I remember that was even a subject of the very, very first campaign I was ever involved in back in the 1970s, because people would vote for the spending and then they'd vote against raising the debt limit. So it's all a game, and the debate is never serious because ultimately it doesn't matter, because they bend the rules, ignore the rules, or print the money, or whatever they have to do. But the debate is always there for political reasons. And the other thing that I think is important to realize is that there's a difference between the debt in the books, the $28 trillion debt that we have. Significant, obviously, but it's relative to what the real debt is, and how do you get the real debt down? And the Fed knows all about this, and a lot of business people know about that. Real debt is when you have inflation, the value of the dollar goes down, and if you double the money supply and prices go up, the dollar goes down 50%, which doesn't work exactly that way, but if the value of the dollar goes down, you pay off your debt with cheap dollars. So the real debt does go down under these circumstances, and that's why, for several years now, it might be for the last decade, they kept saying, boy, all we need now is price inflation. We need the CPI going up to show that the economy's doing well. And we went at least 2%. Well, now they admit to 3 to 4%, and of course there's a lot more of that. So they're going to someday wake up and say, well, we have too much of that stuff we were wishing for. But the policy was deliberate devaluation of the currency by printing too much and really sticking it to the middle class and the poor people, because their prices go up and the rich don't care. And that's the part of this reason why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Because the rich get the money first when it has more value. The poor gets to use it and try to find out how to get their standard of living, just maintain their standard of living. The other thing that's fictitious about all this is let's say that the budget process was much smoother, that all of a sudden they really admitted they worked together and just agree on what Biden asked for. He wants a $2 trillion boost to the economy. So the Republicans said, oh, okay, we'll do that. We're not going to play this game. So if they do that, it doesn't solve the problem at all, because there's no reason why they obey the budget. If they come up short, there's always another appropriation. I remember one time when, I think it was early when Reagan came in, they were able to cut the food stamp program at the beginning of the year. I think it was sincere effort in the Reagan administration. They went along with it. So let's say they cut it by 50%. They cut food stamps by 50%. So they went and spent the whole thing in the first 6 months, And who would say, okay, no more food stamps? So there was an immediate emergency appropriation. It's always an emergency. You know, whether it's a storm in the Gulf, or whether it's a war in the Middle East, or whether it's a virus that's been sent here by the Chinese, there's always an emergency, and there'll be a virus that you have to have lockdown. And the lockdowns cost a lot of money and people suffer, so we have to reimburse them. So it's totally irrelevant to these shenanigans they go on about pretending they're dealing with a budget. And several Federal Reserve Board chairmen told me when I expressed my concern about this, they say, yeah, well, we understand your concern, and but this will work out as long as we can do it orderly, that there's no excitement and overreaching and all this activity. And I would say in some ways it's been rather orderly. You know, there's not been total panic, unless you want to go to the inner cities of the top 10 cities in this country. Somebody might argue, well, it's not so orderly as they pretend. But for the most part, you know, even since COVID, bailouts have occurred. You know, that was a total disaster, and it's still ongoing, but it was orderly because they just sent out $1,600, you know, a month, and they had unemployment benefits to the point where the unemployment benefits were so much better than working that nobody wanted to go back to work. So it's just temporary, and they could say, Ron, it's been orderly, and that's what we went. Well, it's less orderly than it used to be, and it's less orderly than it would be if you had free markets and principled people where they believed in contracts and had sound money. So this is still a very dangerous situation because this orderliness, which is so temporary and superficial, will end.
Of course, Dr. Paul, and you know, we're dealing with probably the pinnacle of short-term thinking when you look at government. And our founders were imperfect, just like everyone else, but boy, did they understand different systems of government, and that's why they wanted to set up a constitutional republic, not a democracy. You'll never see the word democracy in any of the founding documents. But today we have unlimited government, and democracy is the only word you see anywhere. And what do we have as a result? The predictable results. Short-term thinking extraordinaires we have. We have 28 trillion in debt the government has racked up. And all along the way, obviously, politicians have been thinking, well, let the next guy just deal with it. They're not thinking, let's not mess this up for the future. Instead, they're voted in for a short amount of time, few years, and they grab, spend, grow the government, and then they're out and just let the next guy. You don't have to worry about passing anything down to anyone. So there's absolutely no regard for the future, and we could judge that by their actions. They do not care. Now, the founders tried to prevent this. They had separated powers, checks and balances. They wanted to throw enough sand and monkey wrenches to try to prevent this. But alas, after a couple hundred years, you know, politicians are slick, they're demagogues, they know how to circumvent, and they just totally have gotten to the point where they ignore the Constitution completely. So what we have today is short-term thinking, the pinnacle of it, and as Dr. Paul said, it will end, and it'll end badly.
You know, the one thing that never occurs during these debates that repeat themselves just almost every year is it's never used as a reason to shrink the size of government. That is never a serious thought. There's blame game going on, and they'll argue on who gets to pick then who's special interest, who gets the money. But they never say what we should do is shrink the size of government and live within our means. So the size of government is always growing. It never has really shrunk at all. And the one thing that we do know and understand and about monetary policy is the longer the inflation of the monetary system goes, and the more deception there is, the more debt there is, the more malinvestment, the bigger the bubble and the bigger the crash. So this idea that this is orderly and still working is very, very dangerous, because that means that you're getting closer to the cliff. You say, well, you know, we're approaching that cliff and we're going 50 miles an hour, but we still have a mile to go, no sweat. but eventually it goes over the cliff, and that's a rather sudden experience. And that's what even the people who are in charge realize it, and they just say, well, we got to tide it over, we got to delay it for as long as possible. And some people would ask me over the years, they say, well, what would you do about it? If they're not going to cut, how would you suggest that we do this? And my suggestion has always been that if you want, let's say you need this $500 billion to do the federal highways, which are federal highways under certain circumstances, the $500 billion, where are you going to get it if you don't run up debt and print it? Because people won't tolerate the taxes. So what are you going to do? I said, well, under these circumstances, the budget is very big, and we should be able to change things. So why don't we have trade-offs? If we need $500 billion, why don't we cut $600 billion off foreign expenditures and militarism? Come home, quit it. Come home from these countries and quit the foreign aid and quit all this nonsense. Pay the $500 billion to fix the highways. You have 100 left over and put that against the budget. You know, that sounds logical and do it. But there's no way it's going to happen. It's too logical, and somebody, oh, well, the military-industrial complex would be hysterical. The military-industrial complex wouldn't be, you know, just using their energies to manipulate the budget. They'd be in here, you know, with a lot more tougher manipulation, because they're not going to be satisfied with that. So this is the reason it's going to continue. This is the reason why people should prepare, which is very, very difficult. How do we prepare individually, family-wise, community-wise, and how do we do this? And there's no easy answer for that. And my answer has always been, the one thing is that could solve this problem is if we had more freedom, not more government, we would more likely be able to figure out some of the answers to these problems. Especially when the crash comes, you're going to have to look for a better system, because right now, there's a lot of people who know about that, and the cultural Marxists know about it, and they know there's a coming end to what we're doing, and they're looking to take over. I happen to believe they can't do it, because Marxism is such a proven insane idea that the American people can't be that bad. So, but it's still a worry, because what our job is, and we have to do a better job on, is present the case for liberty in a much more effectual way, where we convince people, yes, I would be better off living in a free country than living under the thumb of big government.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up by saying that you know, any human being, all of us, if we had access to unlimited amounts of money, which is what the Fed provides, it would ruin us. It would change us, because it's unnatural. And all jokes aside, because I'm sure there's a lot of people, oh, I would love to be able to just create money out of thin air. It would ruin you too. It would cause you to inflate your opinion about yourself and your abilities. And we see that today. Our current system, this massive welfare warfare state, is falling apart from all angles, every angle that you analyze it from, which is what we do on this show. It's all falling apart. But you see the people in charge, they're saying that, okay, it's falling apart. We will reset everything. We will build a whole new world from scratch. Now that is inflated thinking. That's thinking beyond what you are as a human being, because that's not how the world works. What we're living is an accumulation of thousands of years of traditions, trial and error, customs, religious beliefs, political systems. It's all an accumulation. It doesn't just pop up because a few guys say we're going to arrange the world this way. So it's the exact opposite. So that's what unlimited money does to you. It messes up your mind. And if that's the grand lesson of all of this, these last several hundred years, it's that sound money is important. Nobody, no human being should ever have the ability to create money out of thin air.
Very good. And of course, that's fits into my argument that if we had with us in the past several centuries, like the founders indicated, that by only having gold and silver as legal tender, we wouldn't be facing the crisis we have today. but that's been long gone. But the question is what will replace it when it comes, when the crisis comes, and that is a big question, because the dollar, nominally speaking, will probably exist. It's a definition that has to be important. Even after the British lost their pound as the reserve currency, you still have a pound, but it wasn't the reserve currency anymore. So I think that's important. It's the definition. And Bolivia has run into some problems. They've destroyed their peso, and their welfare system is just total out of control. So they have decided they were going to, try to switch to a gold standard. And so they've started doing that, but I don't think they repealed the welfare state yet. So they're running into a little trouble, and they've just passed a law because there was so much turmoil there. They say you cannot trade and buy and sell gold. So there's restrictions put on, which is a hint toward what they might do in this country. Because in 1933, what Roosevelt did is just stole the gold from the American people. Once again, who suffered the most? The American people, the middle class, and that's who suffered so much from the Depression and on. So that is what they have done, and that's what I think we'll do here. I don't think they'll confiscate the gold here in this country. I think what they'll do is have a taxing authority and regulations authority, or you can't export it, you can't do this, which is essentially when you're overregulated, you're not the owner anymore. And that's why sometimes I say, people say, well, at least we have private property. And I said, sometimes I don't feel that way. Sometimes I think I'm renting property, because I have to, if I don't pay my taxes, which keep going up, to pay all the school stuff that is saving us from ourselves, it's not going to work. So they say that we have to do that. But it doesn't work, because the property can be controlled by people, and you really don't have private property ownership. That can be taken care of through contracts and ability not to, an agreement or a rule. You can't destroy your neighbor's property. There has a neighborhood effect. So you can't have something destroy your neighbor's property. So there would be, one thing interesting about Houston, they had never had zoning laws in Houston, and Houston survived and developed. Is this whole idea that you have to have the regulations that tell you how to use your land is not necessarily true, because it can be regulated through contracts and what you can do. So there are a lot of options available. I think our job is to be prepared with all the options that would have to come up and how you do a transition, because the transition is going to be rough and tumble. And of course, one thing that is going to be necessary is the defense of our Bill of Rights. I sure wish we had better protection of our First Amendment rights. I sure wish we had better protection of our Second Amendment right. And for that matter, the whole Constitution, at least to the point where you're limiting the government, and yet so much is doing. It was so disappointing to me the other day when they brought up Obamacare, and they supported Obamacare for constitutional reasons 7-2. So we have a long way to go, but it's education. It's what our kids have not been learning in our government schools, and why they need to be in other schools. They need to be in private schools or homeschooling or something else, because we cannot depend. And I have family members who have taught in schools and close to public schools and all, but there's shortcomings there. And of course, I like what's going on right now at the school board meetings, because they're sick and tired of this culture of Marxism that has invaded our school district, and people are going. Yes, they can't quite get might not have the opportunity for homeschooling or private schooling, but they still are able to get their meetings made. Even when you get locked out, you get a little bit of attention and you're doing some good. But education from early on all the way up is key to it, because government is a reflection of the attitude and understanding of the people. And when leaders offer them something and the people galvanize around it and they let their voices heard, things can change. That's the only way the Vietnam War stopped, is when the people in this country said, enough is enough. What are we doing way over there just killing people? It has nothing to do with national security. So the people have to wake up and act And fortunately, in spite of all the shortcomings of the internet, there's still information available in our electronic age for us to find the information and find our friends and our allies. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.